This is a follow-up to my sexism video that I addressed to Ashley. First, a couple of ground rules. Sexism can be an emotional topic for some people. There are moral questions that people like to bring up, and people's feelings may get hurt. But the universe doesn't give a crap about your feelings and doesn't give a crap about your morals. Much more pragmatic than that, and I'm going to address this pragmatically.
What's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no
Sexist.
First, I think we can use some perspective. This is you. You are here. And this is your lifetime. And this is, hypothetically, the lifetime of your culture. And this is the lifetime of your species. And this is the history of life on Earth. For you to be here as part of this history line, you can be sure that your parents successfully reproduced and their parents successfully reproduced, and they have been passing on genes down through history until your time. That's why you're here. Cultures have to spread themselves too to be successful throughout time. If nobody spreads your culture from this point forward, it is a dead culture. It does not exist in the future. The best way to pass on a culture is through children. It's much easier to raise children in a culture so that it sticks than to try and give them a new culture later on when they've already got one of their own. So generally speaking, cultures that can indoctrinate children should survive and propagate better than cultures that try to indoctrinate adults. Since culture shares this need to reproduce with biology, it shouldn't be too surprising that there are some parallels between cultures and biology. Species that fail to reproduce fail to be species in the future. So the best reproducers who happen to be well adapted to their situations will continue to succeed into the foreseeable future. Cultures also have to be good at reproducing, and since they reproduce best in young minds, cultures that favour the production of children spread themselves better than cultures that don't. Okay, well that's fine, but does that mean we can't be an egalitarian culture? Do we have to treat the sexes differently? To a certain extent, you certainly do. If we don't bear in mind the need for reproduction and make that a part of our culture, then the culture will fade away because nobody is reproducing, or insufficient numbers of people are reproducing. Does egalitarian mean no reproduction? Well, there is somewhat a relationship. Certainly in the cultures that put women down, keep women in their place, those cultures tend to make women property of men, and thus women end up breeding far more than they actually want to. That makes for a successful culture in terms of number of new minds. In more egalitarian cultures, women reproduce less often because they have the freedom not to. In completely egalitarian cultures, well, the one I'm thinking of in particular is the Shakers. The Shakers are a religious culture. The Shakers believe in absolute equality between men and women, but they're also celibate. And the only way that Shakers have been progressing down through the ages with their Shaker culture, and it's only a few hundred years, is by running orphanages and proselytizing. But it's much better to run orphanages because young minds are better for getting culture. You raise them in the culture. Now, since they don't actually reproduce on their own, and since they are now no longer allowed to run orphanages, the Shaker community has become much smaller. In fact, the Shaker community currently is Sister June Carpenter, Brother Arnold Hadd, and Sister Frances Core. That's not a very successful culture. Western culture hasn't gone that far, of course. We're not all celibate, but we are very egalitarian. There's very much more equality between the sexes than there has been traditionally through most of human history. And we are also suffering from some of the things the Shakers suffered from. we have a lowering birth rate. Eventually, the culture will collapse because there aren't enough new people to take it on, and other cultures have far higher birth rates. This is just pragmatic. If we don't come together as a culture and figure out either how to have higher birth rates ourselves or prevent other people from having birth rates that are as high as they are, we will disappear, because it's very much harder to force people to take on our culture when they've been raised in others. Of course, being the high-minded and principled people we are, and understanding that there are already too many people on the earth, we would like everyone to have the kind of culture that was very egalitarian, with lower fertility rates that go along with such a culture. However, that kind of thinking will die out as soon as this culture dies out, and it will be replaced by people who, quite frankly, think breeding is the bee's knees. Which it actually kind of is.